Okay, let's get started. So morning everyone, thank you for joining us. So my name's Hayley, I'm the events manager here at Makers, and welcome to today's event on empowering junior devs to navigate complex code bases. So we wanted to bring you an event on this topic because when a junior joins a team, you know, it can be challenging for themselves as well as for managers in different ways. Obviously, as a junior, often when you join a team, it will be more code than you've kind of ever experienced, which can be a little bit overwhelming. And as a manager, you want to make sure that your new joiners feel comfortable being able to contribute to the code, but also to ask questions when they do get stuck. But knowing how to go about doing this is the thing that can be a little bit tricky sometimes. So today we're going to hear from two speakers and just hear their experience of kind of tackling this problem. We do also obviously really want to hear from you as well though. So if you have any kind of questions or comments as we go through, please drop them in the chat, and we'll go through them after each talk and, you know, just kind of hear your opinions on what's been discussed. Okay, cool. So I'll start off with Simo. So Simo was a developer at Google for 7 years before moving on to the Memrise language platform. And she joined Makers as a technical coach at the start of 2021. So if you're ready, Simo, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, let me just share my screen. Cool. You can all see my screen, right? Always paranoid with Zoom, what I'm doing. All right, thank you for the introduction, Hayley. So yeah, I'm Simo. I'm just going to be talking about how to help juniors navigate complex code bases for a little bit. As Hayley said, I'm a software engineer coach at Makers. Before that, I worked at Memrise and Google for combined sort of 8 years, mostly as a backend engineer, but I've also done other kinds of roles like data engineering, machine learning engineering, and sort of more general product engineering. And my background is sort of computer science and natural language processing. So yeah, that's me. So navigating complex code bases, what makes it so difficult? So as Hayley said, juniors might be used to working on code bases where they understand what every single file is doing. So maybe because they've written it themselves. So it can be disorienting to be asked to be effective on a large code base full of code they don't understand. They might feel like they need to understand all of the code first before they can even start doing anything. So that they might get, yeah, there's this fear of getting started, rabbit holing into research, and just a lack of vocabulary sometimes to ask what to, you know, to ask for help because they might just not know what they don't know. So I think without knowledge, the only antidote really we have is good processes and good behaviors to follow. So at Makers, we spend a lot of time instilling in our students behaviors and processes that we think will serve them in their careers, such as good debugging process, good approach to writing code like TDD. And our role as coaches, and I think your role as managers, is to support juniors in applying those behaviors and processes. So in the rest of the talk, most of my recommendations will be sort of phrased as sort of behaviors, processes that juniors could use and how you can help them support them in using those. So first one, probably an obvious one everyone probably already does, but you know, it bears repeating, focus on doing. So as engineers, we're problem solvers, and juniors should be solving real problems too. That's really what they need to practice. So give them real tasks whenever possible and as early as possible. But you'll have to set expectations. So prepare juniors for a serious learning curve if you know that there is one. At Google, everybody was always told that nobody is really productive for the first 3 to 6 months because there are so many internal technologies to get to grips with. It was good to know that. But also model learning by doing. So normalize the idea that you don't need to know everything to jump in. You don't need to feel 100% confident even before starting. We try to do this as coaches because often we will have to help learners with something that we might not know everything about, like they're learning a different framework that we haven't seen. And it's good that they see that we don't know it either, but but there is a way to proceed even when you don't know. So of course, it might still happen that they rabbit hole. So how do you notice it? Well, by asking good questions like, what do you spend most of your time on? What has been blocking you? And then how do you deal with it if they do get stuck like that? So one sort of process, I guess, that I like to follow is focusing on inputs and outputs. So as engineers, I think we're used to thinking about inputs and outputs when approaching new problems. And I think it can be useful for discovering code bases as well. So when I was working, my first ever internship at Google, I was working on Chrome, and I had to pull out data to show on this internal Chrome status page thing. And it started with just, pulling out data, displaying it. But after 3 months, I knew the code base well enough to refactor the stack so that it would be easier to pull out the data later in the future. So I think it can be really useful to give juniors tasks that expose them to different sort of IO touch points so that they have to ask themselves, I want this data to end up here. How does it get there? I can see that this data ends up here. Where did it come from? And the nice thing is that existing code or previous PRs, if they have good descriptions, provide sort of scaffolding that juniors can follow and can help them follow the flow of data through your stack. Find API boundaries, find the database calls, and gradually get exposed to more of the code base in that way and learn how different bits relate to each other. So that's one approach I really like. Another approach, more like when you don't know what you're doing at all, is breaking something and then reverse engineering. So at Memrise, I was sort of impatient once, and I had added a field to an API response. And I wanted the iOS team to pick it up, but nobody had time. So then I thought I would just do it. But I didn't understand, anything about the iOS code base, and I didn't know my way around Xcode or Objective-C or Swift. And I knew where I needed that field to end up, and I also knew where the JSON parsing was, but I just didn't understand how to connect them because there were many layers. So I just ended up going like, okay, I'm just going to assume this field exists here and see what breaks. So the reason I was able to then reverse engineer is because I had a good debugging process. So juniors might not know how to best get visibility into what goes on in your stack. So help them get familiar with the tooling. That can be really nicely done through a pairing session where you model a good debugging process and show them what tools you use to get visibility and narrow down to the source of a problem. So at Makers, we have several workshops on debugging where we demo a good debugging process for that reason, because often juniors might otherwise fall back to just changing things at random. So it's good to show these things. So that's my second tip for sort of task-oriented learning, but it's hard to be 100% task-oriented. Just like everyone else, juniors are curious. It does feel nice to understand a bit more and find solid ground rather than hacking your way to solve a specific task. But it can be easy to get lost if you just have this nebulous goal of understand the code base. So the following are some strategies I think help with expanding knowledge in a more strategic way. So first one is revisiting open questions. So I like to sort of come up with questions that came up during my path through the code base when I was solving a task, and think about what surprised or intrigued me, what questions can I explore further. Those are all questions I had at Memrise, I think, sort of from memory. So for example, why do we use raw SQL in some places instead of the ORM? And then in other places we do use the ORM, and where do we even compute streaks and stuff like that? And then coming up with questions based on the code you've already seen is sort of nice because it helps us use them as learning objectives, and gives a feeling of sort of completion when we can answer a question like that, rather than sort of a more vague, I want to understand the code base kind of thing. So how can you help with that? I think prompt them if they do want to understand more but don't know where to start, ask what questions came up for you and let them formulate their own learning objectives. And then let them be a self-directed learner and research on their own first, because I think it is important to just learn to read a lot of code and follow the flow of code. But then be there to answer questions so that they don't rabbit hole, and help them select good learning resources. They might at some point be able to formulate a question, but then not know what is the best learning resources for their level. So this is where you can help. And then make good written communication a priority for everyone. So obviously internal documentation, we all wish we had more. But then there's also smaller things like style guides, system architecture diagrams, or even having really good descriptions on PRs for what the PR is trying to achieve and how and why, because those can be really good examples that they can learn from. And then finally, there's questions like, why do we use SQL and ORM? Well, I feel like those are really nice to document because they're not answers that they will get from anywhere else. And there are nice tools for this, like architecture decision records, or various ways that you can, take that knowledge out of people's heads and into the general pool of knowledge at your company. And then finally, expect good written communication from your juniors too. So at Makers, we encourage students to document their learning because we think it gives them insight into their progress, which makes them feel better because they can get some tangible evidence that they have learned, and they can show to others what they've learned. And for you, it might give you some insight into the quality of your code and code base. If you find out, where does a newcomer get stuck? What do they spend most of their time on? Where are the murky bits? And then you can encourage them to share this learning by writing it up, share it in team meetings or in an internal blog and documentation in the Slack channel, whatever, but give them feedback on it so they can evidence whether their research has led them to understand the right things, and share it widely so it doesn't just feel like homework, because realistically other people will probably learn too, and so let them feel their contributions are well valued, and as beginners they probably will think of explaining certain things that you wouldn't have thought to explain, and that can serve the juniors that come after them as well. So just summary, I think we can help juniors by encouraging, first and foremost, learning by doing and modeling good processes that help with that, such as following the flow of I/O or breaking something and debugging. And then we can support their self-directed learning journey and help them share it with others by helping them formulate learning objectives based on questions, and encourage them to document their learning and share it. And if they do seem to struggle, get insight into their progress by asking them questions like, what do you spend most of your time on? What's been blocking you? What questions came up for you? And then refocus them on a path that works. Thank you. That was it from me.
Awesome, thanks so much, Simo. I just wanted to open it up for questions. If anyone wants to either drop something in the chat or jump on and call out your question, then that would be really great. I can kind of like get the ball rolling if you guys want to have a moment to think of what you might want to ask. So obviously you spent a lot of your career working at Google, and I wanted to know that during your time there, when you were just starting off in your career, were there any specific kind of techniques that they used to help to try to get you up to speed with the code base when you first joined?
Yeah, I think there was a big, because Google has so many internal technologies, they had a big library of these things called code labs, I think, which are basically sort of tutorials style things to help you understand different technologies. So at the beginning, you were definitely encouraged to, you know, your team would help you select the code labs that are relevant to what your team's code base, and you would kind of, yeah, you spend a lot of time doing those, but always combining it with some concrete task as well. Yeah, I think that was sort of the main, I guess the main supporting materials were those code labs. But documentation was not great in general. Like, so I think it was the situation like in many other companies where you wish you had more and the documentation that is there is outdated. So I spent a lot of time just reading code a lot. I think I probably spent too much time reading code. People did tell me like you should ask them questions. So that's something to like look out for. At the same time, reading a lot of code helped me get better at reading code. So yeah.
Balance, basically.
Yes.
Cool, thank you so much. Just gonna see if anyone else has any comments. Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question to Simo. Regarding your experience in Google, obviously, Google is one of the most famous tech companies in the world. So how long does it normally take for engineer when they join the team? How long does it take to be contributing to the code base? On average, not only like at Chrome, because you mentioned your Chrome experience, but maybe other teams. So how long does it take to onboard an engineer?
Well, I guess, yeah, as I said, they say that it takes 3 to 6 months. I think that's what I remember, to be productive. But it doesn't mean that you're not contributing code before. I think it's just that you don't feel productive. You don't feel like you're being productive. But typically, I don't know, you start contributing code from the get-go, you know, from the first few weeks. But often it's like a little bug that you're fixing or something like that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you so much. Oh yeah.
Oh, sorry. I had a question, Timo. I liked your talk, and it's less a question, but just to add what you're saying about like making things fail and stuff. I think my tip that I always give people when they're new to like a legacy code base is to be creative. Like what you normally think of as traditional debugging or refactoring or unit test writing is sometimes not going to work. So you have to be a little bit more creative than you normally are.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Like, I think what I did with the iOS, I was just at my wit's end. I was just like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to break this thing. And I think juniors might just, I guess, they might not feel like that's the right thing to do, or it doesn't feel like very, very, I don't know, clever, but.
Yeah, you're taught not to do it, and you're going to have to kind of ignore that a little bit.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I completely echo the learn by doing in the real world as well, because we do that. And I think it's really valuable for 2 reasons. One, you've not got artificial test scenario, training scenarios. But the second is you haven't got to maintain artificial test scenarios as your development standards change in your main code base, as well as obviously empowering the junior devs to feel more engaged and that they are actually contributing to the code that's being used in production.
Yeah, I think learning by doing is sort of the most important one of all of them. It's just that I guess we need some kind of a bit of like support to not feel lost while doing that.
Just a couple of comments in the chat saying +1 for encouraging people to read more code when they're getting started and beyond. And also, John loved the point about identifying specific new starter tasks and watching out for rabbit holing. So yeah, thank you to everyone for your questions and comments. And amazing talk, Simo, thank you so much. We're going to move over to Alexi now, if you're ready. So Alexi is a team lead and software engineering manager at EY, and he also helps to support the development of their incoming junior team. So if you're ready, Alexi, I'll hand over to you.
Yes, hello, can you hear me? Nice. Do you see my screen as well? Nice. So I want to talk today about navigating through complex code bases, and hopefully it's going to be navigating through complex code bases easier. So in our organization, we have four different types of, four different sources of engineers. One, it's nearshore offices in Europe. Second is on-site developers based in the UK. Third one is we recently tried a consulting company that provides external engineers to our organization. And also we've got fourth source, it's Makers Academy for engineers. And because of these four sources, we have about 100 developers committed to our code base over the last 2 years. And the structure of our organization is we have product-based teams, which means one team is responsible for 1 or 2 products, and it has 3 to 5 engineers, 1 or 2 testers, and 1 or 2 product managers, depending on how many products team is responsible for. And every 6 months, we tend to rotate engineers between the teams just to get a maximum potential of everyone. And so people get to work with different products, and the knowledge is transferred correctly. So we rotate everyone, junior, middles, and seniors. And after some time of doing this, we noticed that some of the modules or some of the projects of the platform tend to be worse or better than the others. And we thought, why is that? So why one modules are worse and ones are better? It's because after thinking, we realized that better modules tend to be written in the same code style and using the same patterns, as opposed to worse modules. So worse modules are the ones that are written in different styles and different code, different patterns, and it's harder to maintain. And so after thinking, we realized that we need to come up with something that will improve navigating through complex code bases and make it faster and quicker for developers of different levels of seniority. And we came up with 3 guidelines. First one is to use common patterns within the code base. This goes to code style, patterns, techniques, how to connect to the database, how to process the response from the API on the Angular. So we use an Angular on the front end. So some common things that you would do in the same style as the rest of the code base. At least you would try. The second guideline is pair programming sessions. And this ensures that there is a knowledge transfer between the team members. And we encourage to have at least 1 pair programming session with other developer within the team a week. So we do this by creating a calendar invites in the Outlook, and they are repeated weekly. So if by some reason you cannot make it to the pair programming session, you can reschedule it, or you can have more than 1 pair programming session if you, for example, working on the same functionality with the other engineer. But at least you're encouraged to have at least 1 a week. And the third guideline is code reviews. Code reviews also encourages knowledge transfer. So something that we do, and we do so we don't have mandatory pull requests. So people are free to commit to development branch. And what they would do, they would send a commit hash to the Slack channel, or they will share it with the team somehow else, and they would ask for a code review. And then the code review notes will be committed after that. So this makes sure that there is no block. So, because before this, we used to have tens of pull requests waiting for someone to review, and that was blocking the testers to test the story, and it was blocking things to move around. It was too slow. So we decided to make pull requests not mandatory. Of course, people are welcome to make pull requests if they want to, but it's not mandatory anymore. So it makes the process much quicker, the process of code review. And so yeah, no mandatory pull requests. And one of the tools to make sure that the code following the same style is to use Google style guides. So this is what we adopted in our organization, and we use it for Java and for JavaScript. And essentially, when the person is doing pull request, is doing code review, he would check against those style guide if the code is following. So that makes sure that the code is looking similar across the platform. And that's also, so those Google style guides, you're able to download it as XML, and you can connect it to your IDE. So your IDE will automatically format it for you. Or you can connect it to linters. If you're using linters for JavaScript, you could use that too. And finally, these three guidelines made it easier to integrate new developers into the teams whenever they are coming. And now, whenever we rotate engineers between the teams, it takes up to 1 week for a developer to get going and contribute code and be productive, which was way quicker than we used to have before these three guidelines. And I've included some of the links. So two of them, it's one of the link is for style guide for Java, and the second one is for JavaScript. That's it regarding my talk. Open for any questions if you guys have.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. I think there's one that's just come into the chat. So Andrew's asking, could you expand on the no mandatory pull requests? What do you mean by mandatory here?
Yeah, so there is a setting, for example, on GitHub or any other source control, you can set your repository in such a way that without approving a pull request, you're not able to merge into the development branch. So that we had before, and that was slow because there was piling up pull requests and people didn't have time to review them, and that was blocking the whole process. So by enabling people to merge straight to dev without mandatory pull requests, that made it a bit quicker. Does it answer the question, or should I expand a bit more?
No, that answers it. Thank you. So that's well, actually, I follow up then. So that was regarding, you said merging to dev. Does that imply that there is a not dev where there is a further merging, or were you releasing off dev?
Exactly. So we have 2 weeks release cycles, and by the end of the release cycle, we release from dev. But towards the end of the cycle, people tend to push less and less, and with more and more code review and testing more and more. So sometimes we have some breakages, but they're not often, and they don't happen often.
Thank you.
I had a question as well. You mentioned at the start of your talk that at EY you bring in developers from, I think, 4 different kind of different talent sources.
Yep.
do you find when you have juniors joining from the 4 different places that there are kind of commonalities in the areas that they struggle with or maybe need a bit more support with, and how do you kind of handle like variations in their kind of the knowledge that they come to the team with?
Yeah, so when they onboard, so when they join the organization, when they join the team, and within the team, they observe different patterns, how people work, and they tend to pick up these things of other engineers and of other people in the team. So that helps spreading the knowledge of how we work. And regarding the differences in different talent sources, so people in the UK tend to be focused on communication over processes, and people from external consulting companies or nearshore offices, they tend to be more focused on processes instead of communication. So some of the people actually wanted to have mandatory pull requests, and they wanted to close their branch from being merged without approval of pull request, which is essentially a process. And we decided that for now, we're going to stick to not mandatory pull request and things like this. So this is what we found, that in external companies, people are more focused on processes. But again, because they join in existing teams, so they tend to observe patterns of the team and how it works, which is more communication over processes.
Cool, that's great, thank you. Just going to wait to see if anyone else has any further questions or comments at all. Okay, no, I think we're good. In which case, the final one that I would ask is, and Simo, maybe if you're able to kind of share your thoughts on this one as well. You both kind of touched on pair programming. In the organizations you've worked in before, do you only tend to pair juniors with more senior developers, or do you kind of find value in juniors also pairing with juniors? Because obviously at Makers throughout their course, juniors are pairing together. So I just wanted to know how that kind of translates into when they're actually in kind of a working setting. I'll go to Simo first.
That's a good question. I don't think I have seen the juniors being paired with juniors that much, although I guess when I started at Google, I was, as a full-time engineer, I worked together with another new starter, and we had our own sort of project together, working on existing code, but see, there was this machine learning model that we were improving together. So I guess that was sort of two juniors paired together, that I think about it, and it worked pretty well. But I don't know, I guess, yeah, we did have, so I guess we had sort of complementary skills, because she had some more experience with machine learning, and then I'd been there a bit, like slightly longer than her, and I'd already started working on it, so it sort of worked out. But I'm not sure that was any sort of someone really deliberately thought about this. I think it was just how it worked out. Yeah. And
Alex, how does it work in EY juniors?
Yes, yeah. So we found that even junior and junior pairing and junior to senior pairing, it's equally beneficial, especially at the start when junior developers are trying to get involved and trying to set up the environment, and pair programming between junior and junior works because they're trying to tackle the same problem, and some of them might already solved it, and they're helping others to spread the knowledge again. And it's slightly different technique, slightly different dynamic when junior with senior, because from senior there is normally like a guidelines or the tips or direction, and junior to junior there is normally just trying to brainstorm how to solve this problem. So it's the dynamic is different, so I think it's helpful in both cases.
Cool, thank you both. We just had a follow-up question as well on pair programming. Andrew's asking how How have you found it during enforced remote working, which is obviously a challenge that everyone's going through at the moment? It seems a lot easier when you're both around a single computer. Zoom's share keyboard and mouse can be CPU intensive and a bit laggy, and tools like Code Together still need corresponding audio chat. Alex, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, sure. It's a very good question. I think we slightly modified the classical pair programming to be able to do it efficiently over the network. And what we do essentially, we figure out who's going to be the driver, who's going to be the follower, and the driver will share their screen, and they will type essentially, and they would have an audio chat between them, and the follower would just follow the process and maybe stick their ideas in the process, and they would both discuss the approach that they're taking on the screen.
Yeah, I think that's how I've mostly done it as well. But I don't think I've often used the sharing keyboard or mouse, because I do find it's an interesting exercise to not be tempted to take over and see how you can guide the other person without having to do anything yourself. So yeah.
Okay, cool, lovely, thanks both. So unless anyone's got any last questions or comments, I think that kind of brings us to the end of the session today. Speedy one this morning. But no, thank you to Simo and Alex for both of your talks. Just a few details before we go. So we're going to make the recording available to everyone who's attended, and also it'll go on YouTube if you want to share it with any colleagues or anything like that. And we'll also be sending you a follow-up ebook that kind of touches on some of the points that have been covered today, and a few kind of other surrounding things about how we kind of help developers get up to speed at Makers. So please look out for that. And yeah, we'll be announcing our next event topic soon. The date will be in July. So if you're not signed up to a newsletter, we'll be making some announcements there. We might need to enlist some of your help with that, so please keep an eye out for it. But yeah, that's everything from us today, so thanks for joining, and we hope to see you at the next one. All right, see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.